Viola James was a quiet presence at Booker T High School, a cafeteria worker with a kind smile and watchful eyes, but few knew her past or the secrets hidden behind those gentle glances. Beneath the apron was a brilliant mind and a legacy of defiance against a system rigged against her people. Born in 1945, Birmingham, Alabama, Viola's life began in fire and fury. She was a child of the Jim Crow South, but also a prodigy. By age 10, she could break complex codes from newspapers. By 16, she had a full scholarship to Howard University. At 21, she was secretly recruited by a covert team of black cryptographers working in the shadows of the civil rights movement. Her job was to protect leaders like King, Carmichael, and Parks by decoding threats, shielding communication lines, and rerouting operations. Viola built encryption networks that saved countless lives, but her role was never public. In 1972, she was betrayed by a trusted colleague and erased from the official record. She was labeled a threat, stripped of credentials, and was forced to vanish. She changed her name, hid in plain sight, and decided to take a cafeteria job at a high school no one would suspect her of. Booker T became her cover and her new mission. For decades, she documented the racial injustices within the school system that's targeting black students, budget thefts, erasure of black history, and silent firings of black educators. But she didn't just write it down. She encrypted it in custom codes only the worthy could crack. For over 40 years, Viola placed her recipes in cookbooks, concealed messages inside maintenance manuals, and stashed microfilm beneath the floorboards. She recorded meetings, created false ledgers to confuse prying eyes, and quietly mentored a few sharp students who showed promise always anonymously, always from the shadows. In 2024, a pipe burst in the East Wing led to the accidental discovery of one of her journals. It landed in the hands of 16-year-old Malik Johnson, a brilliant, bitter hacker with a photographic memory. Alongside his best friend Aisha Campbell, a fearless teenage journalist, the two unlocked Viola's code. What began as a curiosity turned into a full-blown investigation. They found records of suppressed test scores, altered disciplinary actions, even payroll evidence showing the siphoning of funds from black neighborhoods. As they dug deeper, strange things began to happen. Malik's laptop was wiped remotely. Isha's articles were removed from the school site. They received anonymous threats. Viola, still working in the cafeteria, remained subtle but present. One day, Malik found a cornbread slice with a note. Out of curiosity, he decided to check the soup can in the boiler room. Inside were tapes, photos, confessions from teachers who had tried and failed to fight the system. It had files dating back to the 1980s, including footage of secret meetings and policy manipulations. The school board caught wind. Malik and Aisha were summoned by the principal. They were threatened and silenced. But the story was already moving. They published an encrypted web page with Viola's data. Local journalists picked it up. Then national ones spread it. Protests erupted from the news. Viola vanished again this time, not by choice. Her apartment was emptied overnight. Men in suits were seen removing boxes from her apartment. A final envelope, left taped to her door, read, "The truth is not protection, but it's power. You now hold the code. Use it." Malik and Aisha refused to be silenced. With the data, they built a site documenting years of school district corruption. Immediately, lawsuits were filed against the principal and he was forced to resign. Old students returned to tell their stories. Black teachers began organizing and funding investigations that swept the city. Viola became a myth, a legend. The lunch lady's code was whispered across classrooms, parent groups, podcasts, and public forums. A university archive dedicated a wing to her work. Plays, films, and a youth coding club were born in her name. No one knew what happened to her. But one thing is certain, she didn't serve food. She served truth layered, encrypted, and hot. And her code, it fed a revolution. The school board tried to downplay the leaks. They called it fabricated, baseless, and a distraction. But the data Viola hid couldn't be denied. It wasn't just paper. It was tapes, photos, timelines, and voices. It was the history of injustice written in the margins of every report the public was never meant to see. Malik and Aisha were forced off the school paper. They were banned from using the school computers. But that didn't stop them. They went underground. Malik restored an old laptop from parts he'd scavenged. Aisha began interviewing former staffers off record. Viola's code became their blueprint. Her invisible hand is still guiding them. At night, they'd meet in the basement of an old church where Malik's uncle cleaned. With walls lined with worn hymnals and the smell of dust and oil in the air, they worked under a single lamp, piecing together the truth. And then they found it, a reference to something called the ledger. The ledger wasn't just a document. It was Viola's final project, a complete map of corruption across the entire city school district. Names, dates, falsified records, secret kickbacks. But it wasn't easy to access. It was locked behind layers of encryption and ciphers, and hidden within multiple decoy files. Viola had buried it deep. As Malik worked to decrypt it, Aisha dug into those named in the files. The more they uncovered, the more dangerous it became. Anonymous messages began arriving again. Threats turned into surveillance. A black SUV followed Aisha home one night, while Malik's uncle found a tracker under his car. One evening, while decrypting a file, Malik noticed some strange audio logs embedded in the file metadata. Viola had left voice memos. Her voice was older, quieter, but sharp. The voice spoke. "If you're hearing this, then you're smarter than they ever gave you credit for. I knew someone would find this. Just make sure it's used right. Not all revolutions need a stage. Some begin in kitchens." Later that night, someone set fire to the basement of the church. The flames destroyed everything. Every file, every computer. Except Malik's drive, which he had on him based on instinct. He took it home that night. The fire marshal said it was an electrical outbreak. But they knew better. They relocated to the library of a local HBCU. The dean, a former student of Viola's, quietly gave them space. There, they rebuilt. Every encrypted note, every broken ledger was uploaded to a secure server. Then, they launched the Archive of the Unseen, a digital vault for whistleblowers, students, and staff to share their stories safely. Within a month, over 400 anonymous files were submitted. Photos of bruised students, expulsion records for minor infractions, salary sheets showing payment discrimination, a map of unaccredited schools in black neighborhoods. The truth exploded across the city. The city council launched an emergency session and the mayor called for audits. But it wasn't just policy that changed, it was the people. Students protested peacefully with signs reading "Feed Us Truth" and "Lunch Lady Lives." The teachers went on strike. Media coverage turned national. Through all this, Malik and Aisha remained anonymous. The archive didn't credit them. It is credited VJ Viola James. One evening, weeks after the fires, Aisha received a package at her door. No return address. Inside, a faded apron and a school ID from 1984 with a flash drive. The ID read, "Viola James, data clerk." On the flash drive, one last voice memo read, "Truth doesn't die in flames, it adapts, just like us." In the morning after receiving the package, Aisha sat alone in her room, listening to Viola's final voice memo over and over. The rasp in her voice, the steady defiance, it hit harder than any document. Viola wasn't just trying to expose the corruption in the system. She was igniting a movement. And now, the torch had clearly passed. Malik returned with good news. A reporter from a national independent media outlet, The People's Beat, had reached out. They've been following the archive's digital leak trail. Quietly, respectfully. They wanted to help, but only if the story came from inside the community. At that time, Malik concluded that the whole world needs to see this. An interview was arranged. Not with names, not with faces, but with code. The video was animated. Viola's voice memos layered over graphics of redacted files, encrypted messages, school photos fading into police reports. It told the story of how one lunch lady outsmarted a corrupt system and how 2 students uncovered her legacy. Within 48 hours, the video had over 6 million views. Major news outlets scrambled to cover it, but they couldn't keep up. The public wanted more than sound bites. They wanted justice. Whistleblowers across the country began uploading files to the archive. Teachers in Detroit, nurses in Houston, bus drivers in Atlanta. They all referenced Viola in some way. Her name became a password, a mantra, Code V. Back home, the superintendent who had denied the corruption was forced to resign. 3 principals were indicted. A federal investigation opened into racial discrimination across the district's school funding. But not everyone celebrated. Malik's house was broken into. His notes were ransacked. Isha's younger brother was suspended after a mysterious complaint appeared in his file. Threats turned digital. Then physically, they had to act fast. Malik proposed decentralizing the archive, make it impossible to erase. He connected with coders, activists, and privacy experts. They created a blockchain-style network called the Lunch Code, where every new file became part of a permanent, untouchable chain. That was when the press found their names, their faces, and their school leaked. The next day, reporters lined up at the school gates waiting to interview them. Aisha's mom wept in fear. Malik's father demanded they stop everything, but instead, they doubled down. They held a press conference on the steps of the very school Viola once worked at. Students flanked them with homemade signs. Truth tastes better. Code V forever. Feed the future. Malik spoke first. We were just kids looking for answers. Viola gave us the questions we didn't know to ask. Now we're giving them to you. Isha added, you fed on our silence, but she fed us something stronger, and now we're feeding it to the world. The crowd erupted. From that day forward, the movement was no longer underground. It had a name, face, and a mission. Cities began auditing their school systems. Students everywhere formed lunch code chapters groups dedicated to transparency, safety, and equity in education. Even Hollywood came calling. Malik and Aisha refused interviews from the biggest platforms, but approved a community-led documentary narrated by real students and cafeteria workers. It premiered at Sundance, titled The Lunch Lady's Code. But amid the attention, Malik noticed something odd, a repeated pattern in the metadata of the files they were still receiving. Viola's code was back but evolving. Someone out there was adding to it. Months passed, but the archive never slowed. What began as a local rebellion turned into an international chain of justice. Schools from Kenya to the Bronx uploaded files. The network they had created, the Lunch Code, was now maintained by thousands. But with that visibility came resistance. Hackers hired by anonymous donors attempted to break the chain, but it failed. Misinformation campaigns spread across the internet. Photos of Aisha and Malik were doctored, framed in false criminal accusations. News pundits labeled them radical agitators. Yet the community stood with them. A retired programmer from South Korea reverse-engineered part of Viola's original code. He found an embedded AI one designed to detect data tampering. Viola had thought years ahead. She had protected the truth before she was ever discovered. Aisha flew to Washington, D.C. to testify before Congress. She wore Viola's ID around her neck. Her words echoed in the marble halls. Schools are not battlegrounds, but the truth is worth fighting for. Viola didn't die with her secrets. She shared them through us. Meanwhile, Malik trained new archive leaders in underground workshops. He taught kids how to encrypt, how to tell a story with data, how to listen to the quiet people's history that is forgotten. As the movement matured, they created a school, an independent institution called the James Academy, where former lunch staff, janitors, and overlooked workers were the educators. Viola's curriculum wasn't about math or reading scores. It was about ethics, resilience, and systems thinking. 10 years later, on what would have been Viola's 80th birthday, a statue was unveiled in the cafeteria where she once served meals. Not of her face, but of a lunch tray filled with symbols. A whistle, a USB drive, a notebook, and a code string etched in brass. And on the back, the inscription, "She fed them the truth."